The United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense latest intelligence update on Ukraine, July 17, 2023. The dismissal of General Major Ivan Popov as commander of Russia's 58th Combined Arms Army in Ukraine sheds light on a key vulnerability in Russia's artillery operations. According to Popov, one of his foremost concerns was the lack of adequate counter-battery capabilities. Effective counter-battery fire is critical for Russian ground forces' survivability, allowing commanders to swiftly locate and neutralize Ukrainian artillery positions. However, Russia is experiencing a dire shortage of advanced counter-battery radars, especially the modern Zoopark 1M system. Of the small number originally deployed in Ukraine, only a handful are likely still operational. Open-source footage in early July showed another Zoopark radar destroyed near the 58th Army's area of operations. Popov's apparent prioritization of the counter-battery issue underscores artillery's continued central role in the conflict. Russia's inability to protect its counter-battery radars from Ukrainian strikes has likely contributed to the heavy casualties and loss of equipment Russia's artillery units have suffered. Bolstering counter-battery capabilities will remain a pressing concern for Russia as long as Ukraine maintains its advantage in Western-provided artillery systems. The Institute for the Study of War Russian Offensive Campaign Assessment. The disassembling of the Kerch Bridge on July 17 will likely have significant ongoing impacts on Russian logistics operations in southern Ukraine. Video footage confirms that one span of the road bridge collapsed entirely, while another span was damaged but remains intact. The rail bridge appears unaffected. Despite Russian claims that rail traffic resumed within hours, the attack has clearly disrupted a vital Russian supply line. The loss of road capacity across the bridge forced Russian occupation authorities to reroute heavy civilian traffic from Crimea through southern Ukraine. This resulted in extensive traffic jams in Crimea and Kherson Oblast as Russian tourists fled the peninsula. The influx of civilian vehicles likely impeded critical military logistics flowing from Crimea to rear areas in Zaporizhia and Kherson. Russian officials urged civilians to seek alternate routes to mitigate congestion. While Ukraine has not claimed responsibility, the Kerch Bridge and military assets in occupied Crimea are legitimate targets for Ukrainian forces defending against Russia's full-scale invasion. This attack demonstrates Ukraine's ability to strike high-value strategic targets deep in occupied territory. It also highlights Russia's vulnerability in relying on a few tenuous supply lines. The bridge bombing will likely exacerbate logistics challenges Russia faces in supplying its troops in southern Ukraine. Overall, this single strike reflects Ukraine's initiative in targeting key Russian vulnerabilities. It also shows Russia's inability to protect critical infrastructure far from the front lines. The Kerch Bridge attack will probably have an outsized impact on Russian operations, given the logistical significance of the bridge. The Institute for the Study of War key takeaways today. The Kerch Bridge attack will likely have significant long-term impacts on Russian logistics in southern Ukraine. Tourism traffic to Crimea merging with military supply lines has created major congestion as Russia struggles to adjust. Rather than leverage the bridge attack for propaganda, Russian authorities seem preoccupied with mitigating the consequences. This highlights the operational significance of the strike. Russian military bloggers largely blamed Russian leadership for failing to protect the bridge, a key vulnerability. This incident may further damage morale and trust in commanders. Wagner's moves to establish a permanent presence in Belarus continue, raising concerns over Belarusian sovereignty. Russia is still working to reorganize domestic security after the armed Wagner revolt, indicating lingering turmoil. Despite increased Russian offensive operations along the Kharkiv-Luhansk border, Ukrainian forces maintained counteroffensive momentum on at least 3 fronts on July 17. Along the Kupiansk-Svatov line, Russian troops conducted active attacks and likely secured marginal tactical gains. However, these limited advances likely came at a high cost in manpower and equipment. Meanwhile, Russian efforts remained confined to limited ground assaults around Bakhmut, near Avdiivka Donetsk city, and southwest and south of Kremina. These attacks indicate Russia's ongoing struggles to make meaningful progress. In contrast, Ukrainian counteroffensives generated more operational impact. Ukrainian troops continued advancing near the Donetsk-Zaporizhia border and in the Bakhmut sector. Although Russian sources claimed Ukrainian attacks failed in western Zaporizhia, independent confirmation is lacking. Russia's dismissal of at least 8 commanders without reassignment spotlights dysfunction in Russia's military leadership. This aligns with previous assessments that poor leadership has hampered Russia's invasion. Russian occupation authorities are artificially inflating the number of Russian citizens in occupied areas ahead of sham September elections. This undermines any pretense that the elections will reflect the will of the local populace.